Okay, here we have some basic calculations. So what we're going to look at first is breaker fuse size. So that's what you call your overload protection. Most commonly in your electrical panel you'll have circuit breakers. In some older applications you'll still find fuses, fuse panels, but in the industrial commercial setting for disconnects, and even on the homestead or the farm, if you're using a disconnect for specific pieces of equipment, they could be fused. These items we are allowed by code to load only to 80% of their capacity. So if your panel box has a 15 amp breaker, that when you use that 80% power factor, you are only allowed to load that to 12 amps, which would go on a 14 gauge copper THHN conductor. Likewise, 20 amps, 80% power factor, you can only load to 16 amp 12 gauge wire. 30 amp with the 80% power factor, you can load to 24 amps with a 10 gauge conductor. Now this is pretty general. There is a section in the National Electric Code that sizes the wire according to the amperage, because there are many different types of wire. THHN is a stranded copper wire you'd find in most Home Depots or most Lowe's or supply houses for wiring certain things like that with conduit. If you were to use like a Romex, that's like, I believe, type T, some TW or something, TN, whatever, that would be the same. Now if you're getting to aluminum conductors or some different like underground conductors, they have different sheathings, they have sometimes gels in them or whatever to keep them from rotting. They could have different, it could vary quite very different, quite slightly, but in 90-something% of your applications, if you're using copper, these wire gauge sizes are going to match to these breakers. So general rule of thumb, you're using a 30 amp breaker, using copper wire, 10 gauge. You can only load it to 24 amps. The same thing with all those we just went over. So let's look at a very basic. You want to determine the amperage draw on a lighting circuit with one light. So say you have a goat shed. It's got one 100 watt light bulb in it, and it's fed from a 115 volt branch circuit. Now, if you want to solve for amperage, which is what we're looking for in Ohm's law that we looked at on the previous page, that is power in wattage divided by E, voltage. So it's 100 watt bulb divided by 115 volt power source. That one light bulb draws 0.87 amps. So same thing one step further. Say you have an equipment shed and you have 12 100 watt bulbs. It's the same formula, but for the power factor, you have a 100 watt bulb times 12 bulbs, you have 1200 watts. So when you do the 1200 watts divided by the 115, you get 10.4 amps of draw. So that's how you use the basic Ohm's law we went over in the previous page. This is how you apply it to the wiring applications. Now let's say you have a small workshop, and in that workshop you want to put a heater, 2000 watt heater, on a 220 volt circuit, which most heaters of that size would be. Now that 2000 watts divided by 220 volts gives you 9 amps. And if you have a bench grinder, you don't have to solve for amps because it gives you the voltage and the amps right on the nameplate. So you take the 4.4 amps. That's what it says on the nameplate. That's what it draws. No math involved. You just plug in the 4.4. Same thing with a drill press, right? They're going to put 5 amps on the nameplate. Most of your equipment, any equipment that has a motor on it, and other equipment sometimes as well, but pretty much any equipment with a motor should give you a nameplate somewhere on it that tells you that information. So you plug in those coefficients. Now, if you're going to have lighting to feed that small workshop, so let's just say you're going to use 2 100 watt lamps overhead. Each lamp has a 100 watt bulb in it. That's on a 115 volt circuit. You add those 200 watt lamps up, you come up with 200 watts. Divided by 115, those two lights draw 1.7. And again, that's just double the 87 because that's one bulb. This is two, right? It's pretty simple, but so that's 1.7 amps of lighting draw. Two outlets for general purpose. Now, here's where it gets a little sticky because inside the dwelling unit, when you're trying to figure out how many outlets you put on a circuit, you'll generally figure 150 to 180 watts. It's actually 1800 VA, they call it, which is pretty close to 1800 watts. And for lighter circuits, you can go 150. So you can use 150 or 180, but for round numbers, I used 150. 150 watt times 2, because you're going to have two outlets on that general purpose circuit, is 300 watts. Divided by the 115 volts, that you have to allow for 2.6 amps of draw. Now that's, I say allow for because that's just the outlets, right? There's nothing plugged into it. That's what they call a general outlet circuit. That will give you enough capacity to plug a radio in, or a drop light, or, you know, a cordless drill charger, or whatever. If you want to take a 1/2-inch hammer drill or a pancake compressor to nail some boards together, those are larger draws, and so they might draw that up. But you see, by allowing 2.6, even if you put that on the smallest circuit, it's a 15 amp breaker, you're still going to have some room there. So this is something you just want to look at, because if you have specific equipment that you're going to be plugging in there from time to time, like let's just say you're, you know, a carpenter and you've got skill saws and different kinds of things you're going to be running out of there, you want to make sure you readjust that circuit to have it heavy enough. And we'll go over a little bit of that in a second, but I just want to look at the first part. The total draw is on the 220, so you're going to have two circuits here automatically because you're dealing with two different voltages, and 220 is a double pole breaker, 115 is a single pole. So your heater is going to go on one. Now it draws 9 amps. If you look up here, 15 amp breaker, you can load to 12 amps. So that's going to be a 2-pole 15 amp breaker to feed that. And you can use 14-3 copper, Romex or whatever, to feed that heating circuit. And so if you're pretty confident that that's going to heat the area, and you only want to heat it to a certain, you're not going to need any more, you can use that. If you think for some reason you want to leave yourself enough room, because what if down the road you want to add another heater, then you might want to put this on. It would even have to be 2 circuits, because if you double this, if you put a second one on, it went to 18 amps, you're already too big to go on to a 20 amp. You could put a 30 amp circuit and you could fit them both on there. That would be an option. Or you could put two 20 amp circuits, and then each one would still have a little room on it. So you have to look at how you're going to do that. Now the rest of it can go on one 20 volt circuit, because the draw on the 115 volt, everything together, the drill press, the bench grinder, the 2 lights, and the 2 general purpose outlets technically will all draw 13.7 amps. And so if you look up here, you can't fit it on a 15 amp circuit, so you're going to have to go to you're under 16, so you're going to have to go to a 20 amp circuit. Now if you're allowed to load a 20 amp circuit to 16 amps, you're drawing 13.7, and the general purpose outlets are just estimated. You come into something just a little bit heavier, it doesn't take much to push you up over that 16 mark to where you have that overloaded. And so, and because it's a workshop and you're going to have tools in there, you definitely want to overkill these circuits. So in that case, you could do it several different ways. You could, put a 30 amp circuit, or what I would probably do is run 2 20 amp circuits, and I'd put the general purpose outlets and the lights on one, and I'd put the drill press and the bench grinder on the other. Both of those circuits would be light enough to where if you ever wanted to add something down the road or change something, you'd have a little bit of leeway, because you don't want to have it right up to your capacity. And then, 5 years down the road, the bench grinder burns out and you get a new one, and the new one draws 7 amps. Now what do? You overloaded your circuit. So you want to always, whenever you're planning circuits, you want to leave them light. Leave them, a workshop, I would leave lighter than like an interior outlet circuit, because there's more potential for bringing in larger draw items. And so the same thing if we're considering like wiring a kitchen, let's say. Now in a kitchen, the microwave by code has to be on its own circuit, and the refrigerator has to be on its own circuit, and then minimum code requirement calls for 2 20 amp general appliance circuits, and those are usually the plugs that are over your kitchen counter. So if you live alone, let's say, and you do a little bit of cooking here and there but nothing fancy, that's going to be more than you'll ever need. But if you have a family and you and your spouse and 1 or 2 children even like to all cook together as a family affair, like to entertain a lot, and you can be in there and one person's using the KitchenAid mixer to mix dough, and somebody's making coffee and somebody else got something going in the crock pot, and then you got the convection oven, toaster oven going. Some of those large convection toaster ovens can draw 13-14 amps, which that's a 20 amp circuit by itself. So if that's your lifestyle, that's your usage, you have to look at that and you have to consider that, and then realize that maybe even though the code says it's okay to just have 2 20 amp circuits there, you may say, well, the code allows that for a minimum requirement. My needs are, they're more than that. So then you may want to put 3 circuits or 4. I don't know too many scenarios where you need 4, but again, don't always just go on the minimum requirement of what the code says. Consider your usage, your individual lifestyle, and then make adjustments accordingly. So these numbers and these calculations are a jump off point, so to speak. Now, if you're wiring a machine shop and you know what every piece of equipment is because you make specific things, and you know that you've got every piece of equipment accounted for that you're going to need, you can bring those tolerances a little closer. You still want to have a little bit of leeway for growth, but you can come a little closer to your targets because very specific uses on all of those items. And so it's just something to consider. They're making lighting now that is more energy efficient, it draws less amperage, and so you can fit more in a circuit. So the other thing too is you got to consider, if you're in an existing location and you're wiring a tool shed or an equipment barn or whatever, how many slots do you have available in your panel? Because you may be limited to how many circuits you could add without upgrading the panel. So it's okay to want to drastically overkill everything. But if that puts you to the fact where to the point where you're going to have to add 5 circuits and you only have 3 slots in your panel, then you need to sharpen your pencil and you need to really look at your loads, and you need to answer the question, can I fit it on 3 circuits, or do I need to put a new service in or a new panel or whatever the case may be? So those are questions that are going to be answered specifically to each situation. Again, the workshop, always leave yourself a little extra. You want to add a garage door opener down the road, or automatic water for animals or whatever. You want to be able to do that without having to go back and rewire or add more circuits, especially if you're away from the house and you're trenching it. And that's another thing. If you're trenching, it's easy to buy a roll of underground cable and to roll it out. It's very a lot less labor. You can just dig it under the ground a little bit. It doesn't require as much labor. The way to really do it is to go down below the frost line, put a conduit, and pull in a couple extra wires or a string so you can pull in extra wires later. And that it's a little more labor and a little more cost up front, but it sets you up for easy expansion later should you need it. something that you don't count on, comes up and you want to add something in your barn that's 300 feet away from your house, and now you have the ability to pull a new conductor in or whatever. So you want to approach things with that, that kind of common sense look at it. Like, what are my usage and what are the issues that may change in the future that we can't account for, and try to account for them as best you can. So that's probably a good place to stop for here. I know it's very basic, but we can get more in depth if anybody needs any specific information. If you enjoy this, I appreciate a thumbs up. And if you have any specific topics you'd like to cover like me to cover, in another video, I'd be happy to do that. And if anybody has any questions or would like any help or advice with any projects they're working on, feel free to email me, worldwithoutruleoflaw@gmail.com. I hope you found value in this video. Just want to say, don't be afraid to try these things on your own. Build your skill level, get to the point where you're confident that you know what you're doing, but don't be afraid of it. Anybody can really do it. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. As we try to build our skill levels and our competency to work toward our goals of self-sufficiency, this is just another area like anything else. I know, look at myself, and one of my areas that I lack the confidence and the skill in is medical. Anything related to medical. I don't like the sight of blood. I don't like the sight of broken bones. I don't like the sight of any of that. And I have no confidence in it at all, or I started with no confidence. I took a basic first aid course, and as I said a little while ago in this video, I'm working with Rescue Boss to build out a kit. He helped me greatly, helped me build a kit, and I just want to increase my knowledge, and the more I learn about it, the more I know that I really don't want to do it. But if the time ever comes when I need to, I want to have the confidence to go out and to be able to do it, even if I don't want to. But that's just another step towards self-sufficiency. And for some of you that may have a similar fear of something like this when it comes to electrical or whatever, I would encourage you to do the same. Don't be afraid of it. Electricity is something that you have to respect, and you have to do it in a safe manner, and it can be done pretty easily. Thanks for watching. God bless you.